Today is October 28th, 2020. The 2020 elections are now just 6 days away. This includes not only the presidential election, but also the Senate elections and the House elections. And in this video specifically, I will be giving my prediction on the outcome of the 2020 Senate elections. I've already made at least 2 other videos on this topic, but I've decided to give my updated prediction on the topic because a few things have changed since my last video on this topic and today. Just yesterday, I made a video talking about my prediction for the 2020 presidential election, and that video came out yesterday specifically because yesterday was the 1 week mark leading up to election day, and that will most likely be my last video talking about my presidential election prediction unless something big happens between today and November 3rd, something big enough to the point where it warrants me changing one of my predictions from yesterday. Let's say a scandal pops up that lowers Donald Trump's chance of winning to the point where he's less likely to win North Carolina than Joe Biden, then I would make an updated prediction video talking about how I would flip North Carolina from Donald Trump to Joe Biden. But unless something big enough like that happens, I'm not going to be making another video on my presidential election predictions, meaning that yesterday's video on the topic, the prediction I made on that video, that's most likely my final prediction. And that's going to be the case for today's video also, meaning that unless something major happens in the Senate between today and November 3rd, which is 6 days from now, today's prediction that I'm giving in this video, that will be my final one. That'll be the one that will stand up until election day. So let's actually get into it now. I'm going to start off with all the safe Democratic seats and then all the safe Republican seats, meaning all the seats that are almost 100% safe for either the Republicans or the Democrats. Let's start with the Democrats. These include the states of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, New Hampshire, and New Mexico, and Illinois. All 7 of these Senate seats are almost 100% certain to be filled with Democrats. I am almost 100% sure that all 7 of these Senate seats will be filled by a Democrat and not by a Republican, because these states are, for the most part, heavily liberal states. All 7 of these states voted for Clinton in 2016. All 7 of these states are states that are most likely going to vote for Joe Biden in this presidential election. And for New Hampshire specifically, even though it's a swing state sort of at the presidential level, it's not really a swing state at the Senate election level. It is a lot safer for Democrats at the Senate level than the presidential level, which I find kind of interesting. Now for the safe Republican seats, these include Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota, and Nebraska, as well as Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia. So every single state that is shaded in a solid red color right now, these are states that I am almost 100% sure will elect a Republican to the Senate. And every state that is currently in solid blue, including Virginia, which I forgot to shade in earlier, every state that's currently in solid blue on the map, these are all states which I am almost 100% sure will elect a Democrat to fill their respective Senate seats. So that brings Democrats to 43, Republicans to 41. So Democrats are currently up ahead, but right now, before the 2020 Senate elections even begin, Republicans have a majority. Republicans have 53 seats, Democrats only have 47 seats, and that's if you include Bernie Sanders and Angus King. But there are more Republican seats up for re-election than Democratic seats, which gives the Democrats an advantage because they have less to lose and more to gain, while the Republicans have less to gain and more to lose on the other hand. Now for the likely Democratic seats. These include the states of Minnesota, Michigan, and Colorado. Colorado is an interesting scenario because that is currently Colorado's Senate seat that's up for re-election is currently held by a Republican, Cory Gardner, but despite the incumbent being a Republican, it is much more likely that the Democratic challenger, John Hickenlooper, wins the Senate election in the state of Colorado. One of the reasons is because Colorado is just a more liberal state. The second reason is because John Hickenlooper has a lot of name recognition in the state of Colorado. He was the former governor of that state, and he ran in the Democratic presidential primaries early on last year, but then he dropped out early on. But I think that still helped to boost his name recognition a bit. So he has a pretty good chance of winning that Senate seat. I also forgot the shade in Oregon in a solid blue color earlier, but I'm almost 100% sure that this will be won by the current Democratic incumbent. Now for likely Republican seats. These include Montana, Kansas, South Carolina, surprisingly, Alabama, Georgia's normal seat, not the special election, but the normal election, and Iowa. Actually, Iowa I'm going to put to lean, which I'll talk about in a second. And Alaska I'll put as likely also, I guess. So, first Montana. Montana is currently held by Republican incumbent Steve Daines, but his challenger could actually have a good chance of winning this election because he is Steve Bullock, the current governor of Montana. And he also ran in the 2020 Democratic primaries. Although he didn't do well there, I think that still helped to boost his name recognition. I'm actually going to change it to lean now that I think about it because Steve Bullock actually has a decent chance of winning. I still think that Steve Daines has a better chance of winning, but hey, Montana is able to elect Democrats. Currently, there is a Democratic senator serving in the state of Montana. His name is John Tester. He serves as the other senator from Montana besides Steve Daines. So there's always the chance that Steve Bullock could pull through. Now for Iowa, I originally put this as a likely Republican win, but in the past few weeks, the polls have really shown promising results for the Democrats in the state of Iowa, for the Democratic challenger, the current Republican incumbent in the state of Iowa that currently holds the seat that's up for re-election is Joni Ernst, and she's a Republican, and it looked like she had a really good chance of getting re-elected, but now those chances don't look quite as good. It is basically a 50-50 tie in most of the polls in the state of Iowa, so we have to keep our eye on that Senate race, but I think it's still more likely that the Republican incumbent, Joni Ernst, wins than her Democratic challenger. So now we're going to get to the Democratic lean states, Arizona and Maine. Before we get to that though, I would like to talk about this one state, Texas. Texas I'm putting as likely Republican. The reason why I say that is because despite the fact that it has become consistently more and more Democratic in the past several years, it has moved more and more towards the left. You can see that at the presidential level and at the Senate level, but I still think that John Cornyn has a pretty good chance of getting reelected. I don't think MJ Hagar has a good chance of winning the Senate seat over. If I were to predict the results for the Senate seat right now for the Senate election, I would expect John Cornyn to win by a pretty good margin, at least 5 percentage points, maybe even 10 percentage points. We have to see, but I think at the Senate level, it's not ready to vote for Texas is not ready to vote for Democrats yet. At the presidential level, I think that Joe Biden winning is more likely than MJ Hagar winning in the state of Texas. So Texas likely for Republicans. There's a small chance that MJ Hagar pulls through a surprise victory, but don't count on it. Arizona I put as lean Republican. I mean lean Democratic, but I'm honestly changing this to likely likely Democratic the more that I think about it. The reason why I say this is because Arizona has already voted for a Democratic senator just 2 years ago, back in 2018. They voted for Kirsten Sinema over Martha McSally. And even though Sinema got more votes and won that election, Martha McSally got lucky because the governor was a Republican, and the governor appointed her to the other Senate seat that was also vacant at the time. So Martha McSally just lucked out then, but she's most likely not going to win the upcoming election, and she will most likely get replaced by Mark Kelly. This leaves us two more seats, and both the Republicans and Democrats are at 49. Let's talk about Georgia first. Georgia's special election. I'm putting this as lean Republican. I'm not putting this as likely Republican because I think that Democrats have a better chance winning here in the special election than in the normal election. And that's mainly just because of how special elections work. The thing about this special election specifically is that you have two strong Republican contenders but only one strong Democratic contender. So what could possibly happen is that the Republicans split the votes and the Democrat wins the Senate seat. But the way that the runoff elections actually work in the state of Georgia is that you have round one where you have many different candidates running, and then round two is basically where you take the top two winners of round one and they go head to head against each other. So if the Republicans end up splitting the votes in round one, then the Democrat could easily make it to round two, and from there the Democrat could have a chance of winning the whole Senate seat over. I don't think it's that likely to happen. I think more likely than not, the special election will be won by a Republican, but we just have to see. last but not least, North Carolina. In my last video, I put this as lean Republican just because of that scandal that popped up regarding Cal Cunningham, but it actually looks like that scandal didn't really ruin his re-election chances at all. So I'm leaving this as, not even lean, I'm just gonna put it as tilt for now. Tilt Democratic, meaning that Cal Cunningham will probably just barely edge out a win in the state of North Carolina, and he will barely get elected to the Senate in the state of North Carolina, barely edging out a win against the current Republican incumbent, Tom Tillis. So, with all the predictions done now, that leaves Republicans at 50 and Democrats at 50, a perfect 50-50 split. And what happens when you have a perfect split in the Senate? Whenever there's a certain bill that gets a 50-50 vote, the tiebreaker is actually casted by the vice president. So, in theory, the party who has control over the Senate could be determined by the presidential election, the winner of the presidential election, which means that the winner of the upcoming presidential election could not only determine who controls the executive branch, but also who controls the upper chamber of the legislative branch, which would be very interesting because that would place even more importance on the upcoming presidential election than there already is regarding that election, which will be pretty interesting to see. But just 6 more days, it is almost here. Get ready, guys, gear up. Not much time left.